The soft morning light filtered through thin curtains, casting gentle shadows across the small apartment in the heart of New Orleans. Though Jasmine Wright couldn't see the sunbeams dancing across the worn wooden floor, she could feel their warmth on her skin as she sat at the old upright piano in the corner of their living room. At 12 years old, Jasmine lived in a world shaped by sound. Born blind, she had never seen the keys her fingers now danced across, never witnessed the way people stopped to listen when she played. But in many ways, her blindness had sharpened her other senses, especially her hearing, which had become almost supernatural in its sensitivity. "That sounds beautiful. Honey?" Her mother called from the tiny kitchen where the smell of fresh coffee mingled with frying eggs. "Is that something new you're working on?" Jasmine's fingers paused over the keys. "Just something I heard on the radio yesterday. I've been trying to get it right." Her mother, Eliza, wiped her hands on a dish towel and came to stand behind her daughter. She placed a gentle hand on Jasmine's shoulder, squeezing softly. "Well, it sounds perfect to me," but Jasmine shook her head. "Not yet. The middle part isn't flowing right." That was the thing about Jasmine. She could hear a piece once on the radio and recreate it almost perfectly. It was a gift that had first appeared when she was only 4 years old, sitting at her grandmother's old piano during a family gathering. While the adults chatted in the next room, little Jasmine had climbed onto the bench and started playing the church hymn they had heard that morning. The conversation had stopped abruptly, everyone rushing to see who was playing so beautifully. Since that day, the piano had become Jasmine's voice, her canvas, her window to a world she couldn't see but could feel more deeply than most. "Breakfast is ready," Eliza said, breaking into her thoughts. "You need to eat before school." Jasmine reluctantly closed the piano lid, her fingers lingering on the smooth, cool surface. This piano, with its slightly out-of-tune keys and worn ivory, was her most treasured possession. Eliza had bought it at a yard sale when Jasmine was 5, spending money they could barely afford. But she had seen how her daughter lit up around music, how it seemed to open a door in her that nothing else could. Their apartment was modest, a 2-bedroom unit in a building where the elevator often broke down, forcing Eliza to guide Jasmine up 3 flights of stairs. The walls were thin enough that their neighbors could hear Jasmine's playing, but no one ever complained. Instead, people would sometimes gather in the hallway, listening to the melodies that flowed from apartment 3B. "Mrs. Rodriguez from 2A stopped me yesterday," Eliza said as she set a plate in front of Jasmine. "She said your music makes her feel like she's back in her hometown. Says it reminds her of her father who used to play in a band." Jasmine smiled, cutting into her eggs. "She told me that too. She promised to bring me some records of Cuban jazz." Eliza watched her daughter eat, her heart swelling with pride and aching with worry all at once. Raising a blind child as a single mother hadn't been easy. After Jasmine's father left when she was just a baby, unable to handle the responsibilities of a child with special needs, Eliza had taken on double shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide. The hours were long, the pay barely enough, but she was determined to give Jasmine every opportunity. Music lessons, however, remained frustratingly out of reach. The specialized training Jasmine needed, teachers who could work with visually impaired students' Braille music sheets, was expensive. Instead, Jasmine learned by ear, by feel, by the pure instinct that seemed woven into her soul. "Miss Thompson says there's a big concert coming to town next week," Jasmine said, referring to her music teacher at school, a famous pianist, Victor Harrington. Eliza nodded, then caught herself. "Yes, I saw that in the paper. Very expensive tickets, I imagine." "Miss Thompson says she might be able to get some tickets through the school. She wants to take some of her students." Jasmine's voice held a note of hope that made Eliza's chest tighten. "That would be wonderful, honey. What a great opportunity." After breakfast, they went through their morning routine. Eliza helped Jasmine get ready for school, though her daughter insisted on doing most things herself. Jasmine had a fierce independent streak, navigating their apartment with confidence, her fingers lightly tracing familiar walls and furniture. The walk to school was short, just 4 blocks, but filled with a symphony of sounds that Jasmine had learned to read like a map. The jingling bell above Mr. Thibodeau's corner store, the distinctive squeak of the gate outside the Rodriguez's flower shop, the old oak tree where birds nested in spring, filling the air with their morning songs. "Good morning, Jasmine," called Mr. Thibodeau as they passed. "Got any new songs to play for us at the community center this weekend?" I'm working on something special, Jasmine called back, her face lighting up with a smile. At school, Eliza handed Jasmine her cane and her backpack. I'll pick you up at 3 right here, she said, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. I know, Mom, Jasmine said with the slight exasperation of a preteen trying to assert her independence. I love you to the moon and back, Eliza whispered, their daily ritual. And I love you to the stars and beyond, Jasmine replied, before turning to make her way into the school, her cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement. Eliza watched until Jasmine disappeared through the doors, then hurried to catch the bus that would take her to her first shift at the hospital. She would work until 2:30, rush to pick up Jasmine, take her home, make dinner, then head back out for her evening shift at the convenience store. It was exhausting, but when she heard Jasmine play, when she witnessed the joy music brought her daughter, she knew every sacrifice was worth it. At school, Jasmine moved through her day with quiet determination. The public school had resources for visually impaired students, though limited ones. She used a combination of Braille textbooks and audio recordings, her fingers flying over raised dots as quickly as other students' eyes scanned printed pages. But it was in music class that Jasmine truly came alive. Miss Thompson, recognizing Jasmine's extraordinary talent, often asked her to demonstrate pieces for the class. Jasmine, would you show everyone the piece we discussed yesterday? Miss Thompson asked that morning. Jasmine made her way to the upright piano in the corner of the music room. Unlike some blind people who walked with uncertainty, Jasmine moved with surprising grace, as if dancing to music only she could hear. Her fingers found the keys without hesitation, and the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the room. The other students fell silent. Even the usual fidgeters and whisperers stilled. There was something about the way Jasmine played, not just technically correct, but with emotion that seemed to transcend her years. When she finished, the room remained quiet for a moment before erupting in applause. That was beautiful, Jasmine, Miss Thompson said. Now everyone, notice how she captured the feeling of the piece. Music isn't just about playing the right notes, it's about conveying emotion. After class, Miss Thompson asked Jasmine to stay behind. I have some news, she said, excitement evident in her voice. I've secured 10 tickets to Victor Harrington's concert next week, and you're one of the students I'd like to bring. Jasmine's face lit up. Really? Oh, thank you, Miss Thompson. There's more, Miss Thompson continued. I've arranged for our group to meet him briefly backstage after the performance. It's a rare opportunity to speak with one of the world's greatest pianists. Jasmine could hardly contain her excitement as she waited for her mother that afternoon. The moment she heard Eliza's familiar footsteps approaching, she burst out, Mom, I'm going to the Victor Harrington concert, and we get to meet him afterward. Eliza laughed, catching her daughter's infectious enthusiasm. That's amazing, honey. When is it? Next Friday. Miss Thompson is taking 10 of us from the music program. As they walked home, Jasmine chattered about Harrington's famous performances, his recordings that she'd heard on the radio, the pieces she hoped he would play. Eliza listened, grateful for Miss Thompson's kindness and for this moment of pure joy in her daughter's life. That evening after dinner, Jasmine returned to the piano. Instead of practicing her usual pieces, she began playing what she remembered of Harrington's famous interpretation of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Her fingers stumbled in places where the technique was beyond her untrained abilities, but the emotion was there, the longing, the delicate touch that had made Harrington famous. From their open window, the music drifted out into the warm New Orleans evening. On the street below, a small crowd began to gather as they often did, neighbors returning from work, passers-by drawn by the unexpected beauty flowing from the third-floor apartment. Among them stood Mr. Johnson, owner of the local music shop, who had often heard Jasmine play when delivering sheet music to Miss Thompson. He listened, his eyes closed, wondering not for the first time at the raw talent of the blind girl who played with such heart. Talent like hers came along once in a generation, if that. It was a shame, he thought, that circumstances had placed so many barriers in her way. Upstairs, unaware of her audience, Jasmine played on, losing herself in the music, her unseeing eyes closed, her face upturned as if looking toward a light only she could sense. In that moment, her blindness seemed not a limitation, but a gateway to a deeper understanding of sound, of feeling, of the language that spoke directly to the heart. And in the kitchen, washing dishes with hands rough from years of hard work, Eliza listened too, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of wonder at the beautiful soul she had somehow helped bring into this world. Whatever hardships lay behind them or ahead, in these moments when Jasmine played, everything else fell away. There was only the music and the light it brought into their lives. The week leading up to Victor Harrington's concert passed in a blur of excitement for Jasmine. She spent every spare moment at her piano, playing pieces she knew Harrington had performed, trying to capture his distinctive style. Her fingers worked tirelessly over the keys, sometimes stumbling on the more technically challenging passages, but always finding the heart of the music. "You're going to wear those piano keys down to nothing," Eliza joked one evening, bringing her daughter a glass of water. "Come rest your fingers for a bit." But Jasmine shook her head, her face set with determination. "I want to be ready. What if he asks questions about his performances? What if we get to talk about music?" Eliza sat beside her daughter on the piano bench, gently taking Jasmine's hands in her own. She could feel the slight calluses forming on her fingertips, badges of honor from countless hours of practice. "Honey, you know more about classical music than most grown-ups I know. You'll be just fine." The night before the concert, Jasmine could hardly sleep. She lay in bed, her mind racing through all the questions she might ask if given the chance. Victor Harrington wasn't just any pianist, he was a legend, a child prodigy himself who had performed at Carnegie Hall by the age of 10. Now in his 50s, he was renowned not just for his technical brilliance, but for the emotion he brought to every performance. Friday afternoon finally arrived. Jasmine waited outside school, dressed in her nicest outfit, a blue dress Eliza had bought at a second-hand store but had carefully altered to fit perfectly. Around her neck hung a small silver locket, a gift from her grandmother, the only piece of jewelry she owned. Miss Thompson gathered her 10 students, giving them last-minute reminders about concert behavior. "Remember, no talking during the performance, no unwrapping candy, and when we meet Mr. Harrington afterward, you'll each have a chance for one question. Be respectful of his time." They boarded a small bus provided by the school, the excitement palpable in the students' chatter. Jasmine sat quietly by the window, her fingers tapping out an invisible melody on her knees. Beside her, her friend Thomas described the passing scenery, a habit he'd developed since they'd met in 3rd grade. "We're passing the big fountain now, the one in the square. There's a street performer playing saxophone. Now we're turning onto Canal Street." Jasmine smiled, grateful for his running commentary that helped her visualize their journey. Thomas was the only one among her classmates who never seemed to notice her blindness. He just accepted it as part of who she was, no more remarkable than her curly hair or her love of cherry popsicles. The concert hall was grand by New Orleans standards, not as famous as venues in New York or Chicago, but still impressive with its high ceilings and rich history. As they entered the lobby, Jasmine could feel the change in acoustics. The way sounds echoed differently in the spacious room. She breathed in deeply, catching the scent of polished wood, perfume, and the faint mustiness that comes with old buildings. "It smells like music," she whispered to Thomas, who squeezed her hand in understanding. Miss Thompson guided them to their seats, describing the ornate ceiling, the massive chandelier, the red velvet seats that folded down with a soft thump. Jasmine absorbed every detail, building the scene in her mind. As the hall filled, the sound of conversations, of programs rustling, of people finding their seats surrounded them. Then gradually the noise began to diminish. A hush fell over the audience. Jasmine felt the shift in energy, the collective anticipation. The applause started from the back of the hall and rolled forward like a wave as Victor Harrington walked onto the stage. Jasmine clapped until her palms stung, straining her ears to catch any sound that might tell her more about the man approaching the piano. "He's tall," Thomas whispered. "Very straight-backed, gray hair. He's wearing a black suit with a blue tie." He just bowed. Now he's sitting at the piano. The hall fell completely silent. Even the usual coughs and shuffles seemed to have been suspended in anticipation. Then the first notes filled the space, clear, precise, powerful. Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. Jasmine had heard recordings, but nothing compared to this live performance. The sound was so rich, so immediate, it seemed to bypass her ears and flow directly into her soul. For the next 2 hours, Jasmine sat entranced. She recognized every piece, Could have named each one from the first few notes. Harrington's technique was flawless, his interpretation masterful. But what struck her most was how he seemed to find something new in these familiar works, a hidden emotion, a fresh perspective. This wasn't just technically perfect playing. This was storytelling through sound. When the final piece ended, Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 played with such fire and precision that Jasmine could almost see the flames dancing from the keys. The audience erupted. The applause seemed to go on forever, punctuated by shouts of "Bravo!" and whistles of appreciation. Harrington returned for 3 encores, each more dazzling than the last. "That was," Thomas began, but couldn't find the words to continue. "I know," Jasmine replied, her cheeks wet with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. After the crowd began to disperse, Miss Thompson gathered her students. "All right, everyone. We'll be meeting Mr. Harrington in about 15 minutes. Remember what we discussed. 1 question each and be respectful." They were led through a side door and down a corridor that smelled of fresh paint and floor polish. The sounds of their footsteps changed as they moved from the carpeted public areas to the more utilitarian backstage spaces. Jasmine held tightly to Thomas's arm, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. The backstage area buzzed with activity, crew members moving equipment, venue staff discussing the evening's success, a few select guests already gathered for the meet and greet. Miss Thompson positioned her students in a small semicircle, reminding them one last time about proper behavior. When Victor Harrington entered the room, Jasmine could tell immediately. The quality of the silence changed, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. She heard his footsteps, confident and measured, and the murmur of appreciation that followed him. "Mr. Harrington, thank you so much for meeting with my students," Miss Thompson said, her voice higher than usual with nervous excitement. "They're from the music program at Riverside School, and they were absolutely captivated by your performance tonight." "Always happy to meet young music lovers," Harrington replied. His voice was deep with a slight accent Jasmine couldn't quite place. Perhaps British, filtered through years of international living. "I understand you have questions for me?" One by one, the students asked their carefully prepared questions. "What age did you start playing? Which composer do you find most challenging? How many hours do you practice each day?" Harrington answered each one thoughtfully, his responses clearly shaped by years of similar interactions. Jasmine listened intently, soaking up every word. She had rehearsed her own question countless times, about his interpretation of the Chopin piece, how he brought out emotional nuances that weren't explicitly marked in the score. But as her turn approached, a wild, impulsive idea took hold of her. "Sir," she said when Miss Thompson gently prompted her, "I wondered, would it be possible for me to play something for you?" "Just a short piece. I've been teaching myself and I'd love your feedback." A heavy silence followed her request. Jasmine could feel the shock radiating from Miss Thompson, could almost hear her teacher's thoughts. This wasn't part of the plan. "This was asking too much. You've been teaching yourself?" Harrington asked, his tone difficult to read. "No formal training?" "No, sir," Jasmine replied, suddenly aware of how presumptuous her request must seem. "My mother can't afford lessons. I learn by ear from recordings and the radio." Another pause. "Longer this time. And you're blind, I see," Harrington said finally. Jasmine nodded, her confidence faltering under the weight of his assessment. Someone nearby cleared their throat uncomfortably. Jasmine hadn't realized there were other people listening. Staff members, perhaps. Or venue administrators. "Well," Harrington said, and now there was no mistaking the condescension in his voice. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, young lady. But music at this level requires discipline and years of formal training. It's not something you can simply feel your way through." Jasmine felt her cheeks burning. The way he emphasized "feel your way through" made it clear he was referring to her blindness. True musicianship, Harrington continued, warming to his theme, requires not just listening but understanding the theory, the history, the context of each piece. It requires reading the score, interpreting the composer's intentions through their notations. He spoke as if explaining a complex concept to a very small child. "What you're doing, playing by ear, it's a nice parlor trick, but it's not real music." The silence that followed was excruciating. Jasmine felt Thomas shift beside her, sensed his outrage on her behalf. But she also felt Miss Thompson's hand on her shoulder, a gentle pressure that communicated both sympathy and a warning not to respond. "Perhaps when you're older," Harrington said with what he clearly thought was kindness, "you might consider some form of musical therapy. There are programs designed for people with special needs." What Harrington didn't realize, what none of them knew, was that a nearby microphone was still live, feeding into the venue's recording system. The sound technician, who had stepped away briefly for a coffee, returned to his booth just in time to hear the famous pianist's dismissive remarks. Frowning, he made sure the system captured every word. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Harrington," Miss Thompson said, her voice tight. "Children, let's thank Mr. Harrington for meeting with us." The chorus of thank yous that followed lacked the enthusiasm of their earlier questions. As they turned to leave, Jasmine felt a tear slip down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, determined not to let anyone see how deeply Harrington's words had cut. As they walked back through the corridor, Thomas leaned close to her ear. "He's wrong," he whispered fiercely. "You play better than half the kids in our class who've had lessons for years. He's just a stuck-up jerk." Jasmine tried to smile, but her lips trembled. All the joy of the evening, the beautiful music, the excitement of being in the grand hall, the thrill of hearing her musical hero perform, had curdled into something bitter and painful. On the bus ride back, Miss Thompson sat beside her. "Jasmine," she said softly, "I want you to know something. What Mr. Harrington said, that's just one person's opinion. And opinions, even from famous people, can be wrong." Jasmine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I've been teaching music for 20 years, Miss Thompson continued, "and I've seen children with every advantage. The best teachers, the finest instruments, parents who could afford any opportunity, and I've never heard any of them play with the heart that you do." She took Jasmine's hand, squeezing it gently. "Technical skill can be taught. Theory can be learned. But what you have, that connection to the music, that ability to find its soul, that's rare. That's special. And no one, not even Victor Harrington, can take that away from you." By the time they returned to the school where parents waited to pick up their children, Jasmine had composed herself. She wouldn't tell her mother about what had happened. Eliza worked too hard, sacrificed too much. Jasmine couldn't bear to add to her worries. But as she climbed into bed that night, the cruel words echoed in her mind. A nice parlor trick, not real music, special needs. Turning her face into her pillow, Jasmine finally let the tears come. She cried silently, her shoulders shaking with the force of her disappointment and humiliation. She cried until exhaustion overcame her, and she fell into a troubled sleep. Her dreams filled with music she could hear but never play, and audiences that turned their backs when she approached the piano. What Jasmine didn't know as she slept was that across town, a sound technician was reviewing the evening's recordings and shaking his head in disgust at what he heard. What she couldn't know was that by morning, his anger would prompt him to save a copy of that backstage encounter, a decision that would set in motion events no one could have predicted, least of all Victor Harrington. The morning after the concert, Jasmine woke with puffy eyes and a heaviness in her chest that made it hard to breathe. For a few blissful moments, the events of the previous evening were lost in the fog of sleep. Then, like a cold wave, the memory of Victor Harrington's words washed over her. A nice parlor trick. Not real music. She lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of her mother moving about the apartment, the gentle clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the squeak of the bathroom faucet, the soft padding of footsteps across worn floorboards. Routine sounds, safe sounds. She clung to them like a lifeline. "Morning, sunshine," Eliza called, popping her head into Jasmine's room. "I've got pancakes going." "Your favorite." Jasmine forced a smile, knowing her mother would hear it in her voice even if she couldn't see her face. "Be right there." Eliza paused in the doorway. "Everything okay? You sound a little down." "Just tired," Jasmine replied, sitting up and reaching for the clothes she'd laid out the night before. "The concert went really late. Well, come tell me all about it over breakfast. I want to hear everything." In the kitchen, Jasmine picked at her pancakes while giving her mother a carefully edited version of the previous night. She described the concert hall, the music, the other students' questions. But she couldn't bring herself to mention the backstage encounter. Each time she came close, the words stuck in her throat. "It sounds wonderful," Eliza said, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "I'm so glad you got to experience it." Jasmine nodded, swallowing hard around the lump in her throat. It was educational. Across town, in a modest apartment cluttered with sound equipment and musical instruments, Raj Patel sat at his computer, a cup of cold coffee forgotten at his elbow. As the lead sound technician at the concert venue, he'd heard plenty of prima donnas over the years. But what he'd captured on the recording last night had left him seething. He replayed the clip again, wincing at Harrington's condescending tone. The famous pianist might have thought he was being generous, even kind, but his words dripped with prejudice against the girl's blindness, her lack of formal training, perhaps even her race and economic background. What a jerk, Raj muttered, reaching for his phone. He hesitated, finger hovering over the call button. What he was considering could cost him his job. The venue had strict policies about recordings. They were the property of the artists or the venue, not to be shared without permission. But the image of the young girl's face as Harrington had dismissed her talents kept flashing in his mind. He'd seen her earlier, sitting in the audience, completely transported by the music. And he'd heard enough talented musicians in his 15 years as a sound tech to recognize that Harrington's assessment was not just cruel, but wrong. With a decisive tap, he made the call. "Hey, Chris," he said when his friend picked up. "Remember that music shop owner you introduced me to a while back? The one who does those community showcases?" "Yeah, Mr. Johnson, I need his number." "It's about a kid with serious talent who needs a break." Saturday morning found Mr. Johnson standing outside his music shop, unlocking the front door earlier than usual. Riverside Music had been a fixture in the neighborhood for over 30 years, first run by his father and now by him. It wasn't a fancy place. The shelves were cluttered with sheet music and instructional books, instruments hung from the walls and ceiling, and the carpet was worn thin in places from decades of foot traffic. But it was a gathering place for musicians of all kinds, from jazz veterans to classical students to kids just starting to pick out their first notes. The bell above the door jingled as a tall man with long hair pulled back in a ponytail entered. "Thanks for meeting me, Mr. Johnson," Raj said, extending his hand. "I appreciate you coming in early." "Call me Daniel," Mr. Johnson replied, shaking hands firmly. "Any friend of Chris's is a friend of mine." "And you said this was important." Raj nodded, pulling out his phone. "I need you to listen to something, and then I need your help." As the recording played, Daniel's expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief to anger. "That's Victor Harrington?" he asked when it finished. "Talking to a child like that?" "A blind girl, yeah. Couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. Daniel shook his head, leaning back against the counter. "Disgraceful. But what does this have to do with me? I've seen you work with kids, give them a chance to perform when no one else would. This girl, Jasmine, she lives around here. I've heard her playing when I walk past her apartment. She's got something special, and you want me to give her a platform, let people hear what Harrington refused to hear. I was thinking maybe that baby grand you keep in the back room, the one you use for recitals." Daniel considered this, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. "I'd need to hear her play first, and her parents would have to agree." "Of course," Raj said quickly. "I just think she deserves a chance to be heard, especially after being shut down like that." By Sunday afternoon, word had spread through the neighborhood about the incident at the concert. One of the parents who'd picked up their child had overheard Jasmine's friend Thomas angrily recounting what had happened. The parent had mentioned it to their neighbor, who happened to be friends with a local music blogger, who posted about it on social media. The post didn't name Jasmine but described a talented blind student cruelly dismissed by world-famous pianist Victor Harrington. It quickly gathered comments, many from people outraged on behalf of the unknown child, others defending Harrington as a technical purist who was simply being honest. Eliza hadn't seen any of this online chatter. She worked too many hours to spend time on social media. But she did notice that Jasmine hadn't touched the piano since Friday night, an almost unprecedented break in her daily routine. "Aren't you going to practice a little before dinner?" she asked Sunday evening, trying to keep her voice casual. Jasmine, sitting on the couch with a braille book open in her lap, shook her head. "Not today. I'm tired." Eliza sat beside her daughter, gently taking the book from her hands. "What's really going on, Jasmine? This isn't like you." Jasmine's lower lip trembled. She'd been holding everything inside for nearly 2 days and suddenly the dam broke. Between sobs, she told her mother everything: Harrington's dismissive tone, his cruel words, the humiliation of being treated like a curiosity rather than a serious musician. Eliza pulled her daughter close, rocking her gently as she cried. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry that happened to you." "Maybe he's right," Jasmine whispered against her mother's shoulder. "Maybe what I do isn't real music." "Don't you dare," Eliza said fiercely, pulling back to cup her daughter's face in her hands. "Don't you dare let anyone make you doubt your gift, not even someone famous." A knock at their door interrupted the moment. Eliza rose to answer it, quickly wiping away her own tears. "Mrs. Wright?" A man stood in the hallway, holding what appeared to be a business card. "I'm Daniel Johnson from Riverside Music. I was wondering if I could speak with you and your daughter for a moment." Eliza looked confused. "Do I know you?" "No, ma'am. But I know your daughter, or at least I know her playing. I often walk past your building in the evenings and hear her at the piano. She's quite remarkable." Eliza hesitated, suspicious of this unexpected visit. "What exactly do you want?" "To offer her an opportunity," Mr. Johnson said simply. "May I come in and explain?" After a moment's consideration, Eliza stepped aside to let him enter. Mr. Johnson greeted Jasmine warmly, speaking directly to her rather than talking about her to her mother, a courtesy that many people failed to extend to blind individuals. "I run a small music shop a few blocks from here," he explained, sitting across from them. "We have a beautiful baby grand piano in our back room, where we sometimes hold recitals for local musicians. I'd like to invite Jasmine to play there next Saturday." Jasmine's face, still blotchy from crying, registered surprise. "Why me?" Mr. Johnson smiled, though he knew she couldn't see it. "Because talent deserves to be heard. And from what I've heard through your window, you have plenty of talent." What Mr. Johnson didn't mention was the recording that Raj had played for him, or the growing controversy online. He didn't want to pressure the girl or her mother with the politics of the situation. He simply wanted to give Jasmine a chance to play on a proper piano, in a space designed to make her music sound its best. Eliza looked skeptical. "This is very kind, but—" "Mom," Jasmine interrupted, sitting up straighter. "I'd like to do it." The determination in her voice surprised both adults. After her tears just moments before, this sudden resolve seemed to come out of nowhere. "Are you sure, honey?" Eliza asked, studying her daughter's face. Jasmine nodded, her unseeing eyes directed toward where she'd heard Mr. Johnson's voice. "Yes, I'm sure." The week that followed was a blur of activity. Jasmine returned to her piano with renewed purpose, practicing more intensely than ever before. She decided to play an original composition, something she'd been working on for months but had never completed. Now the piece seemed to flow from her fingers as if it had been waiting for this moment. It was a complex piece that blended classical structure with jazz harmonies and hints of the soul music that filled the streets of New Orleans. It was technically challenging but emotionally direct, music that spoke from her heart without apology or explanation. Saturday arrived bright and clear. Riverside Music had been transformed for the occasion. The instruments had been moved aside in the back room, chairs arranged in neat rows, and the baby grand polished until it gleamed. Mr. Johnson had expected perhaps 20 or 30 people, friends, family, a few regular customers who appreciated good music. What he hadn't expected was the crowd that began gathering an hour before the scheduled performance. People spilled out onto the sidewalk, peering through the windows, asking if there was any more room inside. "What's going on?" Eliza asked, helping Jasmine navigate through the packed shop. "Why are so many people here?" Mr. Johnson looked slightly embarrassed. "There's something I should probably tell you," he began, then explained about the recording and the social media attention it had received. By now, clips of Harrington's dismissive comments were circulating widely online. Music blogs had picked up the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath tale, the privileged, established artist crushing the dreams of a young, disadvantaged talent. Some of Harrington's defenders had pushed back, arguing that he was merely being honest about the importance of formal training. "So all these people are here because of controversy?" Eliza asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Some, yes," Mr. Johnson admitted, "but many are here simply because they love music and believe in giving everyone a fair chance to be heard. And," he added with a gentle smile, "quite a few are your neighbors who've been listening to Jasmine play through open windows for years." At the appointed time, Mr. Johnson welcomed the crowd and introduced Jasmine. As she made her way to the piano, guided by her mother, a hush fell over the room. She sat at the bench, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment she hesitated, suddenly aware of all the eyes upon her. Then she remembered why she was here. Not for them, not for Mr. Johnson, not even to prove Harrington wrong. She was here for the music, for the joy it had always brought her, the way it connected her to something larger than herself. With that thought, she began to play. From the first notes, it was clear to everyone in the room that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Jasmine played with technical skill far beyond her years and formal training. But more importantly, she played with soul. Her music told a story, of struggle and joy, of darkness and light, of falling down and rising again. In the audience, Raj recorded everything. His camera focused on Jasmine's face as she swayed with the music, completely absorbed in her performance. This, he thought, was what real music looked like, not the stiff, technically perfect but emotionally sterile performances that won competitions, but this raw, honest communication from one heart to many. When Jasmine finished, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the room erupted in applause so thunderous it seemed to shake the walls. People stood, cheered, some wiped away tears. Jasmine sat at the piano, a smile spreading across her face as the sound washed over her, the sound of people who had truly heard her. By that evening, Raj's video of Jasmine's performance had been uploaded online, paired with the audio of Harrington's dismissive comments. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, the established artist's cold rejection, followed by the undeniable evidence of the young girl's extraordinary talent. The video spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Music educators shared it as an example of why talent should never be judged by background or circumstance. Disability advocates pointed to it as proof of the barriers that still existed for differently abled artists. Parents showed it to their children as a lesson in perseverance. And in homes and offices across the country and beyond, people who knew nothing about classical music, jazz, or technical skill simply watched and listened, moved by the pure emotion of Jasmine's playing and outraged by how quickly she had been dismissed. Within 24 hours, the video had millions of views. Within 48, it had been picked up by major news outlets. And within a week, as Jasmine and Eliza tried to process their sudden thrust into the spotlight, the first phone call came from a producer at a national television show, asking if Jasmine would be willing to share her story and her music with their audience. The world, it seemed, was finally ready to listen. The Wrights' small apartment had never felt so crowded. The living room, once a quiet sanctuary where Jasmine practiced her piano for hours undisturbed, now buzzed with activity. A producer from the morning show paced back and forth, phone pressed to her ear. A sound technician adjusted a microphone stand beside Jasmine's piano. A stylist fussed over Jasmine's hair, while another crew member explained the interview process to an overwhelmed Eliza. "We'll go live at 8:15, the producer, a brisk woman named Diane, explained. 3 minutes for the interview, then 2 minutes for Jasmine to play. Short and sweet, but it'll be seen by millions. Jasmine sat quietly through all of this, her hands folded in her lap. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind she could hardly comprehend. After the video from Riverside Music went viral, everything had changed. First came the local news, then regional coverage, then national interest. The story of the blind girl mocked by a famous pianist had struck a chord with people around the country. "How are you holding up?" Eliza whispered, finding a moment to sit beside her daughter amidst the chaos. Jasmine gave a small shrug. "It's a lot." Eliza squeezed her hand. "We can stop any time. Just say the word." But Jasmine shook her head. "I don't want to stop. I never expected any of this." The truth was, despite the overwhelming nature of the attention, Jasmine felt something she hadn't felt before: validation. For years, her music had been a private joy, appreciated by her mother, her teachers, and the occasional neighbor who heard her playing through open windows. Now suddenly people were really listening. They were hearing what she had always tried to express through her playing. 2 minutes, people," Diane called, clapping her hands for attention. The crew scrambled to their final positions. Jasmine took a deep breath, her fingers unconsciously moving in silent practice of the piece she would play, her original composition, the one that had captivated the audience at Riverside Music. Eliza had helped her name it New Light. A title that felt right for this moment in her life. The interview itself passed in a blur. The host asked questions about her background, her lack of formal training, her reaction to Harrington's comments. Jasmine answered honestly but briefly, uncomfortable with being the center of attention. But when asked about her music, her face lit up, her words flowed more freely. Music isn't just sound to me, she explained. It's texture and color and emotion. When I play, I can share how I see the world even though I can't see it with my eyes. Then came the moment to perform. The cameras went silent. The crew held their breath and Jasmine's fingers found the keys. She played with the same heart and soul that had captivated the audience at Riverside Music. Perhaps even more so, the events of the past weeks had added new depths to her interpretation, new emotions to express. When she finished, the small crew in her living room burst into spontaneous applause. The host dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Even Diane, the no-nonsense producer, looked moved. That was incredible, the host said, squeezing Jasmine's hand. Absolutely incredible. What none of them knew was who else was watching the broadcast that morning. In a spacious office at the Juilliard School in New York City, Dr. Eleanor Richards, chair of the piano department, sat forward in her chair, eyes fixed on the television. Beside her, her colleague, Professor Thomas Chen, watched with equal intensity. My God, Dr. Richards murmured as Jasmine finished playing. Did you hear what I just heard? Professor Chen nodded slowly. Raw talent like that? It's extremely rare. Dr. Richards reached for her phone. We need to contact this girl immediately, before everyone else does. The Juilliard School of Music was perhaps the most prestigious music conservatory in the country, if not the world. Its admissions process was notoriously selective, accepting only the most promising young musicians after rigorous auditions. Students typically spent years preparing for these auditions, working with top teachers, mastering challenging repertoire, perfecting their technique. Jasmine Wright had none of those advantages. What she had, though, was something that couldn't be taught. A natural musicality, an intuitive understanding of how to communicate through sound, and a technical facility that, while unpolished, showed remarkable potential. What are you thinking? Professor Chen asked as Dr. Richards dialed a number. I'm thinking we need to make an exception to our usual procedures, she replied. I'm thinking we need to hear this girl play in person as soon as possible. 3 days later, Eliza stared at the letter that had arrived by express mail, reading it for the third time as if the words might change. They want to fly us to New York, she said incredulously, for an audition at Juilliard. This weekend. Jasmine sat very still on the couch, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. Juilliard? The Juilliard School? That's what it says here. All expenses paid. They've seen your television performance and want to hear you play in person. But, Jasmine's voice faltered, I'm not trained. I don't have a proper repertoire. I can't read music, at least not regular sheet music. Eliza sat beside her daughter, taking her hands. They know all that, honey. They've seen the video. They know your background. And they still want to hear you play. The reality of what was happening began to sink in. Juilliard, the school that had produced some of the greatest musicians in the world, the place that represented the highest level of musical education, wanted to hear her, Jasmine Wright, a blind girl from New Orleans who had taught herself to play on a second-hand piano. What if I'm not good enough? Jasmine whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear. Then we come home, Eliza said simply. And your life is still amazing and you still have a gift that brings joy to people. But honey, I think you are good enough. I've always thought so. The flight to New York was Jasmine's first time on an airplane. As they took off, she gripped her mother's hand tightly, her face a mixture of terror and exhilaration as she felt the pressure changes, the vibrations, the strange sensation of leaving the ground behind. We're flying, she whispered, a smile spreading across her face as the initial fear gave way to wonder. We're really flying. New York City assaulted her senses from the moment they landed. The sounds were overwhelming. More voices than she'd ever heard speaking at once, more cars, more movement, more everything. The smells were different too, less humid than New Orleans, with sharper notes of concrete and exhaust mixed with food vendors and perfumes from passing pedestrians. They stayed in a hotel paid for by Juilliard, a place fancier than anywhere Eliza had ever slept. Jasmine ran her fingers over the smooth, cool sheets, the plush carpet, the marble bathroom counters, marveling at the luxury. Mom, feel these towels, she called. They're so soft. Eliza watched her daughter's excitement with a mixture of joy and apprehension. She worried about what would happen if Juilliard rejected Jasmine, if this magical journey ended in disappointment, but she also worried about what would happen if they didn't, if Jasmine was offered an opportunity that would take her far from home, into a world Eliza barely understood. The morning of the audition dawned clear and cool. A driver picked them up at the hotel, navigating through the bustling streets to the Juilliard campus at Lincoln Center. As they approached, Eliza described the impressive buildings to Jasmine: the Metropolitan Opera House with its iconic arched windows, the clean lines of the Juilliard building itself. "Sounds beautiful," Jasmine said softly. "I wish I could see it." "You'll experience it in your own way," Eliza assured her. "That's what you've always done." They were met at the entrance by a young woman who introduced herself as Professor Chen's assistant. She led them through hallways where the sounds of practice rooms floated out: violins and cellos, flutes and clarinets, voices soaring in operatic areas, pianos playing complex passages. Jasmine tilted her head, absorbing it all, a small smile playing on her lips. The room where the audition would take place was smaller than Eliza had expected, intimate rather than intimidating. A magnificent grand piano dominated the space, its lid fully open. 5 people sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle: Dr. Richards, Professor Chen, and 3 other faculty members. "Welcome to Juilliard, Jasmine," Dr. Richards said warmly, approaching them. Unlike many adults who met Jasmine for the first time, she spoke directly to the girl rather than to her mother. "We're very glad you could come." "Thank you for inviting me," Jasmine replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm honored to be here." "Before we begin," Professor Chen said, "we want you to understand that this is an unusual situation for us. We typically audition students who have been preparing specific repertoire for years, who have extensive formal training." Jasmine nodded, her hands clasped tightly together. "But sometimes," Dr. Richards continued, "we encounter talent that doesn't fit our usual parameters, talent that makes us reconsider our usual procedures." She guided Jasmine to the piano bench, letting the girl take her time to adjust her position, to feel the keys beneath her fingers. "This is a Steinway Model D concert grand," Dr. Richards explained. "Different from what you're used to playing. Take some time to get comfortable with it." Jasmine ran her fingers lightly over the keys, testing the action, the responsiveness. She played a few scales, a quick arpeggio, getting a feel for how the piano responded to her touch. A smile spread across her face. This instrument was so much more responsive than any she had ever played, so crisp and clear and powerful. "Whenever you're ready," Dr. Richards said, "we'd like you to play for us. Play whatever you feel best represents your abilities and your musical voice." The room fell silent. Eliza held her breath, watching her daughter's face. This was it, the moment that could change everything. Jasmine took a deep breath, centering herself. Then, without announcement, she began to play. She started with her original composition, New Light, the piece that had captured hearts online. But as she played, she expanded it, developed it in new directions, as if the magnificent piano inspired her to explore territories she hadn't previously imagined. From there, she moved into an improvisation based on a Chopin nocturne she knew by heart, maintaining the essence of the original, but adding her own interpretation. Influenced by the jazz she'd grown up hearing in New Orleans, by the gospel music from the church down the street, by the rhythm of rain on their apartment roof. As she played, the faculty members exchanged glances. Dr. Richards leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Jasmine's hands. Professor Chen scribbled notes rapidly. The others sat in various states of amazement, occasionally nodding or raising eyebrows at particularly remarkable passages. When Jasmine finally finished, the room remained silent for several seconds. Then Dr. Richards cleared her throat. "Jasmine," she said, her voice slightly husky with emotion, "what you just played, it was extraordinary. Truly remarkable," Professor Chen added. "Your technical skills need refinement, certainly, but your musicality, your innate understanding of structure and emotion, these are things that can't be taught." Jasmine bowed her head, overwhelmed by their words. "We would like to offer you something unprecedented," Dr. Richards continued. "A full scholarship to our pre-college program, with specialized training tailored to your unique situation. We have faculty who are experienced in teaching visually impaired musicians, who can help you develop Braille music reading skills alongside your already impressive playing by ear. Eliza gasped softly. A full scholarship? Yes, Professor Chen confirmed. Including housing stipends for both of you. As we understand, Jasmine would need you here, at least initially. We believe, Dr. Richards said, looking directly at Jasmine, that with the right training, you could become one of the most significant pianists of your generation. Your gift is that substantial. Jasmine sat very still on the piano bench, her unseeing eyes wide, her hand still resting on the keys that had just opened a door she never imagined possible. What do you think, Jasmine? Eliza asked gently. This would be a big change. A whole new life. Jasmine turned toward her mother's voice, her face glowing with a mixture of disbelief and joy. A new light, she said softly, echoing the title of her composition. Then more confidently, yes, I want this. I want to learn everything I can. As they left Juilliard that afternoon, paperwork in hand, plans already being made for their move to New York, Eliza described to her daughter the way the sun was setting behind the city skyline, painting the buildings in gold and pink. It's a new beginning, Eliza said, her arm around Jasmine's shoulders. For both of us. Jasmine nodded, her face turned up to feel the last warmth of the sun. And all because of music, she said. All because I didn't stop playing. What she didn't say, what she held quietly in her heart, was that it had also happened because someone had told her she couldn't do it. Victor Harrington's cruel dismissal, meant to diminish her, had instead set in motion events that led her here, to Juilliard, to opportunity, to a future she had never dared to imagine. Sometimes, she thought, the people who tell you no are the ones who push you toward the people who will say yes. 6 months passed like a whirlwind. Jasmine and her mother settled into a small but comfortable apartment near the Juilliard campus, provided as part of her scholarship. The transition hadn't been easy. Moving from the familiar streets of New Orleans to the hustle and bustle of New York City required both of them to develop new routines, new ways of navigating the world. For Eliza, it meant finding a part-time job at a local hospital while Jasmine was in classes, learning to use the subway system, and adjusting to the faster pace of city life. For Jasmine, it meant encountering more challenges as a blind person in an unfamiliar environment, but also discovering more opportunities than she had ever imagined possible. At Juilliard, Jasmine worked with professors who pushed her harder than she'd ever been pushed before. They recognized her natural talent but also saw the gaps in her training, the technical elements she'd missed by learning on her own, the theory she hadn't been taught, the standard repertoire she hadn't mastered. Your hands need to be more relaxed here, Professor Chen would say, gently adjusting her wrist position. Feel how different that sounds? Dr. Richards focused on expanding her musical vocabulary. You have an incredible ear, Jasmine. Let's use that to learn pieces you haven't encountered before. A specialist in teaching visually impaired musicians worked with her on Braille music notation, a complex system that would allow her to read scores independently. It was frustrating at first, like learning a new language with her fingertips, but Jasmine persevered, determined to master every tool available to her. Most importantly, her professors encouraged rather than stifled her natural creativity and improvisational skills. What makes you special isn't just your ability to play what others have written, Dr. Richards told her. It's your ability to create something new, something that's uniquely yours. On a crisp autumn morning, Jasmine sat in Dr. Richards' office, her fingers tracing the edges of a Braille music sheet she'd been studying. I have some news, Dr. Richards said, a hint of excitement in her voice. Carnegie Hall is hosting a benefit concert for arts education in underprivileged communities. They've asked if you would perform. Jasmine's hands froze on the page. Carnegie Hall, me? Yes, you, Dr. Richards replied with a smile in her voice. Your story has inspired a lot of people, Jasmine. The way you've overcome obstacles, the way you've pursued your passion despite the barriers. The organizers believe you're the perfect person to represent what this benefit is all about. Jasmine sat very still, processing this information. Carnegie Hall was the most prestigious concert venue in the country, perhaps the world. Legendary musicians had performed on that stage, artists she had listened to on the radio for years, whose recordings had taught her, inspired her. I don't know if I'm ready, she said softly. You are, Dr. Richards assured her. But you have 3 months to prepare, and we'll work together to make sure you feel confident. You'll play your original composition, New Light, which you've developed beautifully since coming here, and you'll follow it with the Chopin piece we've been refining. Who else will be performing? Jasmine asked. There was a slight pause before Dr. Richards answered. Several notable musicians, including Victor Harrington. The name hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Her hands clenched involuntarily, crumpling the edge of the braille sheet. Harrington? He'll be there? Yes, Dr. Richards said carefully. He's a regular performer at Carnegie Hall benefits. But Jasmine, you don't need to interact with him if you don't want to. He'll perform at different points in the program. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to calm her suddenly racing heart. 6 months had passed since that backstage encounter, since his dismissive words had cut so deeply. In that time, she had tried not to dwell on it, focusing instead on her studies, on growing as a musician. The viral video had faded from headlines, though occasionally someone would recognize her name and mention it. I'll do it, she said finally, her voice stronger than she expected. I want to play at Carnegie Hall. What she didn't say, but what Dr. Richards understood, was the unspoken end to that sentence. I want to show him he was wrong about me. The next 3 months were intense. Jasmine practiced more diligently than ever before, refining her original composition with guidance from her professors, mastering the technical challenges of the Chopin piece, while maintaining her own distinctive interpretation. Don't just play the notes, Professor Chen reminded her. Tell the story only you can tell through this music. As the date of the concert approached, media interest in Jasmine's story revived. Journalists requested interviews, wanting to know how her life had changed since the viral video, how she was adjusting to Juilliard, what it meant to her to perform at Carnegie Hall. Eliza helped shield her daughter from most of these requests, allowing only a few carefully chosen interviews. She needs to focus on her music, she told the persistent reporters. That's what this is all about. Behind the scenes, the organizers of the benefit concert made sure that Jasmine and Victor Harrington were scheduled for separate rehearsal times. No one wanted an awkward encounter before the performance, but they couldn't control everything. 2 days before the concert, Jasmine was practicing on the Carnegie Hall stage, familiarizing herself with the acoustics of the space and the feel of their Steinway grand piano. She had just finished a run-through of her program when she sensed someone enter the auditorium. The footsteps were measured, deliberate, moving down the center aisle toward the stage. That was quite remarkable, a voice called, a voice she recognized immediately. Victor Harrington. Jasmine's hand stilled on the keys. She hadn't expected to encounter him like this, alone, unprepared. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she considered simply gathering her things and leaving. But something kept her seated at the piano. Thank you, she replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. The footsteps continued until they reached the stage. I came early for my rehearsal, Harrington explained. I didn't expect anyone to be here. Silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken words. Jasmine waited, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, drawing strength from the instrument that had become her voice, her connection to the world. I owe you an apology, Miss Wright, Harrington said finally. My comments to you that night were uninformed, unkind, and entirely wrong. Jasmine hadn't expected this. In all her imagined scenarios of encountering Harrington again, an apology had never featured. I followed your progress since then, he continued. Your admission to Juilliard, your performances, your original compositions. Your talent is exceptional. I failed to recognize that. Blinded by my own prejudices and narrow definition of what makes a true musician. Jasmine felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also a strange sense of compassion for this man who had once seemed so powerful, whose words had once held such weight, and who now stood before her, humbled. Thank you for saying that, she said simply. I wonder, Harrington said, his voice taking on a tentative quality she wouldn't have imagined possible from the imperious man she'd met backstage months ago, if you might consider a suggestion for the benefit concert. Jasmine tilted her head, curious despite herself. What kind of suggestion? The organizers have asked me to perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It's a piece that requires 2 pianos. I thought perhaps you might consider joining me for it. As a duet. The proposal was so unexpected that Jasmine didn't immediately respond. Perform with Victor Harrington? The man whose dismissal had set her on this path? The idea seemed almost absurd. Why? She asked finally. Harrington was quiet for a moment. Partly as a public acknowledgement of my error, he admitted. But mostly because I believe our styles, different as they are, could create something quite extraordinary. Your emotional depth combined with my technical precision, it could be remarkable. Jasmine considered this. It would mean intensive rehearsals over the next 2 days. It would mean working closely with someone who had hurt her deeply. But it would also mean an opportunity to perform one of the most beautiful pieces in the piano repertoire, on one of the world's greatest stages. I would need to discuss it with my professors, she said cautiously, and with my mother. Of course, Harrington replied. Take whatever time you need. I'll wait for your answer. After consulting with Dr. Richards, Professor Chen, and Eliza, all of whom expressed both concern and cautious support, Jasmine agreed to the duet. The next 2 days were a blur of intensive rehearsals, with Harrington proving to be a demanding but respectful collaborator. Your interpretation here is fascinating, he said at one point, referring to a passage she played differently than the traditional approach. I would never have considered that phrasing, but it works beautifully. By the night of the concert, they had developed a performance that honored Rachmaninoff's composition while incorporating elements of both their styles, Harrington's technical brilliance and Jasmine's emotional intuition, creating something neither could have achieved alone. The benefit concert began with speeches from organizers, explaining the importance of arts education in underprivileged communities. The auditorium was filled to capacity. Wealthy donors, music lovers, journalists, and a special section reserved for children from the very programs the benefit aimed to support. Jasmine performed her solo pieces first. As she walked onto the stage, cane in hand, the audience welcomed her with warm applause. She settled at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. Her original composition, New Light, had evolved since her viral performance at Riverside Music. With the guidance of her Juilliard professors, she had developed it into a more structured but still deeply personal piece that told the story of her journey, from darkness to light, from limitation to possibility. The audience listened in rapt silence, many leaning forward in their seats, drawn in by the emotion pouring from her fingers. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, people rising to their feet in spontaneous appreciation. After several other performances, including a string quartet and a soprano soloist, came the final piece of the evening, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, performed by Victor Harrington and Jasmine Wright. A murmur ran through the audience as Harrington led Jasmine to the stage, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Few had expected to see these two musicians together, the established classical pianist and the young prodigy whose career had been launched, in part by his dismissal of her talent. Two grand pianos had been positioned at center stage, their curves facing each other like enormous black swans. Harrington guided Jasmine to the second piano, making sure she was comfortably seated before taking his place at the first. They began to play, and from the first notes it was clear that something magical was happening. The rich, romantic melodies of Rachmaninoff flowed between them, passing from one piano to the other like a conversation between old friends. Where Harrington brought precision and clarity to the technical passages, Jasmine added depth and emotion to the lyrical sections. Together they created an interpretation that honored the composer's intentions while adding something uniquely their own. In the audience, Eliza watched through tears, hardly able to believe that the confident young woman on stage was her daughter, the same child who had taught herself to play on their old upright piano, who had faced so many barriers with quiet determination. Dr. Richards and Professor Chen exchanged satisfied glances. This was why they taught, for moments like this when a student transcended their teaching to become a true artist. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then the audience erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of Carnegie Hall. People cheered, whistled, stamped their feet, called for encores. Harrington stood and bowed, then walked to Jasmine's piano, taking her hand and helping her up. As they stood together at center stage, accepting the audience's appreciation, he leaned close to her ear. "Thank you," he said, his words meant for her alone amidst the thunderous applause. You've taught me more than I could ever teach you. Jasmine smiled, her face glowing with the joy of music fully expressed and fully received. This moment, standing on the Carnegie Hall stage beside the man who had once dismissed her, represented not just personal triumph but something larger. A statement about who gets to make music, who deserves to be heard, whose voice matters in the world of art. The benefit raised over $3 million that night for music education programs in underprivileged communities across the country. But its impact went beyond the money. Videos of the performances, especially the unexpected duet between Harrington and Jasmine, spread widely online, inspiring conversations about accessibility in arts education, about recognizing talent in unexpected places, about the power of music to transcend barriers. In the days that followed, Jasmine received offers from record labels, invitations to perform at other prestigious venues, requests for interviews from major publications. But the moment that meant the most to her came after all the crowds had gone, when she sat alone at the piano in her practice room at Juilliard, playing simply for the joy of it. Dr. Richards found her there, late in the evening, the professor said, leaning against the doorframe. When I first heard you play, I knew you had something special. But what you did at Carnegie Hall, that wasn't just good playing. That was artistry. Jasmine's fingers stilled on the keys. Do you think I could really have a career as a concert pianist? I think, Dr. Richards replied, you can have whatever career in music you want. But more importantly, I think you'll always play with the same heart you did when no one was listening, when you were playing just for yourself in that apartment in New Orleans. That's what makes you not just good, but truly great. Jasmine smiled, her fingers finding the keys again, beginning the opening notes of a new composition taking shape in her mind. A piece about transformation, about finding light in darkness, about voices that refuse to be silenced, about music that, against all odds, demands to be heard.